Hello, everyone. So, this is Lala, and I am going to start covering the challenge. And before I really get into it, I feel like I should talk about my history and journey with the challenge. So, while I was in high school, like a decade ago, a friend of mine told me, "Oh, you should really watch this show called The Challenge. It has people from the real world, it has people from the ultra world rules, whatever. They come back season after season and they compete." And this was during the 1 year where I did watch The Real World. I watched The Real World Portland, which had Jordan, Naya, Avery, and Johnny on it. And then the second and final season that I watched was The Real World Explosion. I think that's what it's called, which had people like Corey, Ashley, and Jana on it. So I was thinking about getting into it. I didn't end up watching the challenge, and I'm not one that likes to get into a show without knowing a lot of the history on it. So a few years pass by, I'm watching Big Brother. Big Brother 18 was the most recent season at the time. That ended in September 2016, and then it was revealed in late 2016 that a few people from Big Brother 18 would be on the challenge, and this would be the first time that people from Big Brother would be on the challenge. And I was like, okay, I've heard of the show. I wanted to get into it a few years ago, but I didn't. This would be a great place to start. So I watched from Vendettas live, and I've watched every other season since. So Final Reckoning, both War of the World seasons, Total Madness, Double Agent, Spice Lice and Allies, Ride or Dies, and Battle for a New Champion. So I was very familiar with the seasons of the 30s. I didn't rewatch any of the seasons prior, despite me watching the challenge for about 5 years up to this point. So it wasn't until last year where I said, you know what, I'm going to start rewatching the show from start to finish. I was going to start from season one to and then continue on that way, but apparently it is very hard to find the first 10 seasons of the show. They're not on any streaming platforms, and while there are other ways to watch it, it was still hard for me to access it. I already heard of some of the moves and main actions that happened in some of the middle seasons because once you're in the fandom for a while, you hear certain things. So then I decided to watch from season 30 backwards, but I was like, okay, no. I want to start with seasons that are a bit more recent because those are the people who are on the current challenge, and it would be easier just to go from there. So last year, I watched from season 20 to season 30, and then I rewatched all the 30 seasons that I watched live, and I rewatched it this time. This was before Battle for a New Champion, so I can have a fresher perspective on things. So Battle for a New Champion comes out, then I decided to watch seasons 10 to 19, and then I finally found ways to watch seasons 1 to 9. And it was a very interesting experience watching the revolution or the evolution of the show. And that so I could just have the basic knowledge of everything that happened, and it would cause me to understand the people that I saw in later seasons that are longtime veterans more so I could see their roots. So that is pretty much how my experience with the challenge came to be. So what I'm going to start today is I'm going to rewatch all of them, but I'm going to go from season one onwards. And in this video, I don't know if I'm going to get to the entire era run or just do the first few seasons in one video, because the first four seasons really aren't the challenge. There are no eliminations. It's really just two teams facing off against one another. It's really the world the road rules format with them just driving around on buses and competing in random competitions. They're not living in a house together, and it's very different than everything else. So I'm probably going to just cover the first four seasons here. I might do the other five in another video or do those separately or maybe combine them here. So that is my overall journey. And we're going to start with the first season. Alrighty, so the first season of the challenge is called Road Rules All Stars, and it's very interesting because it is essentially the Road Rules format, but there's no one on Road Rules on it. When you call something All Stars and you attach it to a certain show, you're expecting the people that were cast on that show to be returning house guests from that show to be on the season, but they decided to have the people partake in the season only be from real world or the real world. And apparently, this was a big deal back in the day, since returnees on reality TV in general just didn't happen. So they are in New Zealand for the season, and the people that are on it are Cynthia Roberts, who I recognized from All Stars 3, which I also watched recently, Eric Nyes, John Brennan, Rachel Campos, and Sean Duffy. So a lot of the episode 1 is talking about their post real world fame, and we got a lot of cast interactions, and a few of them had record deals, and I know a lot of them joined the show because of that, and in the 90s they actually had some sort of fame. So the cast goes to some insane ghost asylum, and the reactions to this are very interesting, since the goal is that they needed to prove that ghosts exist. So Eric wants to challenge the ghost, which was ridiculous. Cynthia wants absolutely nothing to do with it, and the guys are trying to pull pranks on the women. The cast ends up stuck in some room all night, and the men are acting like literal chickens. Anyways, they complete the goal, and that's the end of the first episode. So for the second episode, we see some odd showmance of some sorts between Rachel and Sean. Actually, it's not a showman, since it turned out to be a marriage, and it's a long-running marriage where they got married and they're still together like 26 years later. Though apparently they're uber mega, and from what I saw on the challenge Reddit, a lot of people don't like them for their policies. But that's here no there, to be honest. Anyways, the next task is shearing sheep and cow milking at some farm, which of course they complete. The next challenge, which is also in the episode, it is called Fly by Wire. So they're swinging on some bootleg helicopter, and then they quickly move onto them rolling down a huge ball. This might be the third episode. I don't really know, to be honest. Anyways, John gets injured from this challenge, and Eric decides to snap at most of the cast, especially the couple, though the others get involved, because he wants to roll down the ball again. And it's interesting that something like this is the very first fight of the challenge proper. And it's over something that was so small and minuscule. So their next mission is some jump and walking down some sort of building that might be called Hot Dog on a Stick. I don't really remember, to be honest. Actually, no, that's a lie. The Hot Dog on a Stick is the next, is the challenge afterwards. I think the bungee jump or walking down a building is called Urban Rap, which honestly makes no sense. Anyways, those two tasks get completed quickly, and they have another task where they are improv performers at some comedy show, and they're intimidating people from, I think, our Road Rule seasons. I don't know what it is. It could be Real World Seasons, could be Road Rule Seasons. I haven't really watched either, outside of the two examples that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. And their final task is to record a song, and because some of them have recording contracts, some of them are very insecure about it. Anyways, the season ends with them being at a restaurant, and they are given tickets to go to Costa Rica whenever they want. In general, this season isn't the challenge at all. There is no competing elements towards it. They're all going to win no matter what. They're not going against each other. It's not even like it's a road rules versus real world thing. And there's only 5 people on it. There was that showman, and that's one fight. But honestly, the cast in general is just very forgettable. Though you could enjoy it in a vintage sort of way, like I tend to do with a lot of OG reality TV seasons. It'll be interesting to watch some of these people on their future seasons, since I watched this season for context. Rachel is the only one who didn't return after this. She was okay from what I saw on this season. John Brennan was honestly just very forgettable, but he's on Battle of the Seasons, which I have watched, but it'll be interesting watching that, knowing what I know of him here. Sean Duffy was kind of just meh, if I remember correctly. Cynthia was kind of likable, but she is someone who I'm going to forget about pretty quickly, despite me watching her on All Stars 3 recently, so it'll be interesting to see how she is on Battle of the Sexes too. And Eric Nice is the most memorable person here, and he definitely seemed more crazy and zany compared to the others. But in general, it's just the format here that really just doesn't bring up much out of anyone. So that is my opinion on this season. So now it is time to talk about the second season of the challenge, which is Real World Road Rules Challenge. And apparently, a lot of people consider this to be the first season of the challenge, since it's really the first season that has some sort of competitive element, with there being two teams on it, and it really emphasized the road rules and real world thing, which is a common thing throughout the first era. Apparently, the show also considered this to be the first season at some point as well, but they retroactively changed it, so they apparently got some of the really big names from the prior Real World and Road Rules seasons, and they put them here. This would be the first time a road ruler would be able to return to a reality TV show, so they went with some of the bigger names. So I do like the season a bit more than the first, since there is a bit more of a competitive element due to there being two teams. I felt like they had a bigger budget for this season, just based off location and some of the challenges and some of the people they were able to get on this season, and there's a bit more people. Though they still had the common issue with the challenges really not being up to par, a lot of people being under-edited and just not very interesting, and it just not being the challenge. So I'm going to just get right to it. So the season starts with the cast being blindfolded, and then the first challenge is them catching something from the floor, which Road Rules ends up winning. They then have to drive to a rolling rig destination, and they're racing against one another, where we see some mooning and some fun interactions there. The real world ends up losing the challenge, meaning the road rules ends up winning, and Beth ends up getting injured. She's sent to the hospital, and her team wants her to go home, since she will slow them down on the challenges. But because Beth wants TV time, she decides to come back. Alrighty. She's technically supposed to be bedridden, but she doesn't really do that. There's definitely a showmance that is being set up between Janet and Neil, and it really isn't interesting to me whatsoever. And honestly, I'm kind of shocked with the amount of showmances that there are in the season, especially for a late 90s reality TV show. Anyways, the next challenge that they have to bet race against one another, which is definitely a very cheap ass challenge. And then they have to steal bears as well, though that's something they do a few times throughout the season, the stealing the bear stuff. And of course, the road rules win this challenge. Nathan and Montana, or yeah, it's Callie, though it was hard for me to distinguish between them, but I realized it's Kelly, are also getting close, and they're talking about the death of a parent of theirs, and they start to bond here. And this is yet another uninteresting romance. If I remember correctly, I also think the real world bus is being held back by the police, or it was held back by the police for a bit. They are now playing basketball with Reggie Miller and Kobe Bryant, but there's a twist. Since Road Rules has been kicking ass throughout the entire season, they are the ones who get to play against the basketball players, while the real world team has to watch Kobe's dogs. I did find this to be very interesting to watch, and Cyrus ends up being the referee in the match. So there's a few segments of Ronnie and Kefla getting close, so they're mainly just dancing in a club, and it seems like they're editing this as a showmance as well. And there's also something with Noah and Anne, where they're wrestling with one another, and it's seen and edited as something that is very sexual. Noah and Anne have a conversation about feminism and its misogyny, essentially, and it's something that they have conflict over. So the next challenge is to bungee jump into the water to get a bunch of rings. There's a bunch of complaining about who is going to jump, where Beth and Montana are trying to go back and forth about them not wanting to do it, and it took Janet forever to jump, and these are all the real worlders. And there's a lot of arguing that the group has about this. They all go to Vegas next, and there's a lot of commentary about the road rulers doing anything for money, and the real worlders are not cutthroat like that. And from what I've noticed of just watching the Era 1 seasons, this narrative tends to be very permanent in it, or prominent in it. They now have to go to Vegas and create the most entertaining show, and the real world team actually went for once, despite Mark trying to be the king of hip hop. After seeing the cast intermingling with the fans, they get a recording that hints that their next challenge will involve the military, so it's clearly some boot camp setup. There's more closeness between Noah and Montana, and people are speculating if they hooked up the night beforehand. So just when they think that they're done with the challenges, the boot camp one is of course very entertaining, and unsurprisingly, Road Rule ends up winning that one. They're taken to the Playboy Mansion, and they are greeted by Victoria, Selves that hopefully I said that correctly, where they speak to some of the models, and they really are just hanging out with one another. Anna somehow ends up getting injured at the Playboy Mansion, and the last thing they do is blowing up some sort of truck or whatever. Everyone is asking one another what they like about the season or their journey on the season, and their final task is to grab as much money as they can, which will be the amount that they take home. And the the road rulers win the final challenge, and they win the season overall. Everyone but Beth essentially is talking about how they created a new family and how they're all friends, so on and so forth. Looking at the cast and their accomplishments on the show, a lot of them don't return, and I can definitely see why that is. Janet, Jason, Neil, and Haley don't return. Kelfa didn't return to the flagship again, but he did return to All Stars 4, where he was a lot more interesting and entertaining there. Roni was in was more interesting on All Stars 3, though she was likable. Here, I don't remember a whole lot about Anne outside of her weird showman's enemy ship. Montana, I'm looking at him or her. She was kind of forgettable as well, or maybe I'm confusing her and Anne. Beth, of course, caused a bit of conflict with people just not liking her, but even she really wasn't interesting in this season. And Mark was very forgettable on the season as well, despite him being the godfather and the OG of the challenge. And he's had much better, much more interesting seasons as well. So yeah, the season's only better than the first, just due to it having a better format, and they're starting to get the hang of things slowly. But there's still a lot of work that needed to be done. Now it is time to talk about the third season of the challenge, which is called Real World Road Rules Challenge 2. And I definitely enjoyed this quite a bit more than I enjoyed the other two seasons. I felt like the cast here is a lot more memorable. There is more drama in the season, and it definitely has the same format as the second season, especially, and I clearly don't love the format. But while it was something that I personally found to be enjoyable, it's not something that I ever see myself rewatching, and it doesn't hold up against most of the actual challenge seasons. So there's a lot of talk from the alumni about what they've been up to after their shows, with some going back to school and some others chasing fame. Gladys from Road Rules, who will end up being a challenger herself, taking her daughter onto the show, is hosting the season, and the first challenge is bungee jumping from a tall stratosphere tower. After going to the club last night, or the night prior, Tech did not show up, and the cast is pissed off at him, though there was a fun interaction with him and Heather once he finally shows up to the challenge. Heather is deemed the leader of the real world team, and they're given some hints about the next challenge, which is essentially a demolition derby of driving cars against one another at a derby, where they are working in the pairs in their teams. The real world team wins the challenge, and they apparently have some agreement to not smoke the entire season, where they'll get more money, and Peggy or Piggy has a meltdown over it, though David is trying not to smoke. This doesn't last long at all, since literally in the same evening, Peggy is caught smoking and Heather catches her, and Peggy has some meltdown about it. So there's one episode that I really couldn't find whatsoever. This happens quite a bit during the first era in general, due to it not being on streaming services and me not being able to find it anywhere else. But from what I could get there of it, Lost is on the outs, and the Road Rules team lost a challenge, or they won a challenge, which involved wrestling. Yeah, the real world won a wrestling challenge that the Road Rulers lost. So on to the next episode. Lost walks off for a moment to the point where some people were worried if he quit, and he does this several times in the season. Kefla from that season is hosting the next challenge, which involves catching a bunch of snakes. There is some tension between Veronica and Amaya, which is something that's apparent throughout the season, with the latter shading the former for not having to show off her boobs, and Veronica being mad for her team consistently losing. The Road Rules win the challenge. Heather has a rant because they keep on going out late at night when they need to prepare for their missions, which is why the real worlders are losing a lot. There are some tasks regarding kissing a cow on the nose and the cows just run off, and some skinny dipping, and I found these to be pretty interesting. We then see the men are tasked with walking in drag. The cast is taking part in the RREC games as their next challenge, and this is my favorite challenge of the first 3 seasons, for sure, where they have to catch a pig and put it in a pen, or the first part of this, and then the next part is eating a pie with their faces and with their hands tied behind their backs. The World Roots team wins the pie, and the real worlders, especially Heather and Amaya, to the point where they're arguing with the judges and some of the real rulers, since the real worlders, I believe, no, the world rulers still had a lot of their pie on their pie baking thing, whatever. Point is, they had a lot of food still in their pies, and they felt like the real worlders felt like the judges gave them a false win. Amaya initially refuses to take part in the pig and water challenge since she's a vegetarian, and the real worlders are annoyed, but she ends up doing it, though she lasses out afterwards. All this was for nothing since the road rulers wins the entire challenge. Or they win this challenge anyways. The next part involves diving into the mud pit, and this one was pretty cool to watch, and a few of them even pull the audience members into the mud. There's some more tensions in the real world van with Davis, I believe, Heather, and Amaya. At the credits, it is exposed that Amaya ate McDonald's meat that same morning, so she did all the hoopla hopla about her being a vegetarian for no reason. So I couldn't find the next episode, but from what I could find, there was a mud football game and the road rulers ended up winning it. And there's some drama with Piggy and her boyfriend or someone she was talking to back home. Dan and Holly are getting close and it's being portrayed as some sort of showmance, though we now know that it really wasn't a showmance and there's no cheating happening since he had a girlfriend the entire time. Anyways, the next challenge is a swampy bug race. Davis's competitive attitude is really pissing off a lot of his real world teammates, and he thinks that their poor mentality is why they don't win challenges. Kat and David go at it during the challenge, and the world rulers beat them once again, where David and Kat continue arguing because he doesn't want to finish after losing. Apparently, Heather knows that Dan has a girlfriend. Is that the right person? I don't know. Whatever. Who is. Hold on. Holly knows that Dan has a girlfriend. My bad. And that's definitely an issue. But they waste so much time on this, and it literally goes nowhere. So moving on to the next episode. Ross is feeling very left out on his team, and you can tell that there's some tension with him and Veronica especially. But apparently he has not taken the time to get to know the others on his team, which they call out. From what I could gather, the audio was not great. Ross said that Piggy was not black and referred to her like he was speaking to a waitress. I'm assuming she is biracial. They don't really go much into her background, and this comes up a few times during this episode specifically. Or at least in this episode and the next episode. The real worlders decide to create a fake mission for the road rulers because they're pissed that they're getting their asses whooped in these challenges. And the producers clearly just let this happen because they wanted extra content. So I found that to be very interesting and fun. While the road rulers are doing this fake mission, the real worlders are going out clubbing and we see Veronica and Ross getting into it over some poor joke. He attempts to leave the game, he comes back to hear her apologize, and then they argue again before Veronica does apologize. The real worlders reveal to the road rulers that the task was fake, and of course the latter are not happy about it. There's continued discussion about who is black between Peggy and Loss, and we have another scene where the team asks him if he's in a better mood, and he doesn't respond whatsoever. They state that it's not rude. Sorry, they state that it is rude that he isn't responding to them when they're generally asking questions, hoping that he gets better. And then Blackness comes up again, and then he tells them that they shouldn't try speaking to him since he has nothing to say, and this was draining to watch. It's very clear why he never came back for another season after this, and you can tell that the producers didn't like him either. I also forgot to mention that he called himself a racist. So the challenge is some sort of fashion show swimsuit contest, which the real world ends up winning. Apparently, Picky may have physically attacked Lost, though they didn't expel her, and they have to be separated for a night, with Lost threatening to quit again. And Holly, I think, ends up bawling her eyes out for some reason. Anyways, on to the final episode. The cast are asking one another flirty and daring questions, and we move on to the cast, or sorry, not the cast, the challenge called Stir Crazy, where they are skydiving from a flying helicopter and they have to land at a circle. Yes ends up getting injured on the challenge from a poor landing, and Amaya ends up getting injured, i.e., a concussion from a bad fall as well. Road Rules win the challenge, and it's apparently the last day of the E-Trades, which is the stock investment program that they've been doing all season, and the Road Rulers did a lot better than the Real Worlders. Road Rules wins the entire season, and they, of course, all talked about their experiences on the season. So I definitely think the cast here is better than it was on the first two seasons, and looking at the charts, you definitely see that a lot of them come out back. Yes was honestly kind of boring, and he kind of reminds me of like the Landon Horacio and those type of people. But was a bit more lighthearted than they were. But honestly, he wasn't that memorable here. Lost was definitely a pain in the butt. He seemed very miserable. He really wasn't entertaining, and the drama that he brought was just draining. Veronica is the same old Veronica, and while she was definitely more innocent and young and youthful, you could definitely see that there's that bitchy, conniving, cutthroat side to her, which was pretty entertaining. I believe it was Dan. I don't remember a whole lot about now that I'm just looking at his name, but he comes back for a few more seasons, so he must have done something to win them over. Holly, I really did not care much for the showmance angle. That really went nowhere. That was kind of just annoying to watch. Kiki was definitely hilarious to watch, and she was very unique. There's no one like her. Um, Amaya was also someone that I found very entertaining. She had a lot of personality. Same thing with Heather as well. Davis definitely had his more fiery moments as well, so I appreciate him there. He would go on to host one of the seasons, and he did a few more seasons. I think Heather is one of the only people on the season to never return. Tech was hilarious too, and he technically never returned to another flagship season, but he would become more prominent on All Stars. Kat was very forgettable and boring. Same with Mike, those two really didn't contribute much at all. But that is my experience with the third season, and this one was like 10 or 11 episodes, so it was twice as long as season one and a bit longer, no, more than a bit longer than season two. And now we are moving on to the final season of the pre-elimination, pre-competitive reality TV show format in Real World Road Rules Extreme Challenge. So this is the third season that has the Real World team and the Road World team. And this is the first, or not the first, this is the next season that has absolutely no eliminations, though this is the first season where someone leaves. You can definitely tell that the show is starting to get a bit more successful because they granted 17 episodes. They greenlit 17 episodes for the season, which showed that they believed in the show, but it also weakened the season, in my opinion, since there's a lot of filler and this cast just wasn't strong enough to work those 17 episodes. In addition to that, I found it very hard to distinguish between a lot of the blonde women throughout the season. As I go through my notes, you'll see that I call them different names, and it didn't take me until like halfway through the season to know some of their names. And there are a few who are kind of duds in general, like some of the guys, though there were definitely a few that stood out, and there are definitely more than a few decent moments in the season. But in general, it's just not the challenge, so I probably will have this very low on the list. So we have the same introduction here that we did in all the other seasons, with many of them going into show business and others just going back to their normal lives after their Real World or World Rules season. So Julia, I initially had her as Amaya, but it's Julia, is doing. Wait, no, sorry. Ayana is still dealing with the death of her mother, which happened in between seasons, and this will be important for later on. The Real World team talks about how the show keeps on sucking on the challenge, or the Real World Road Rules Extreme Challenge, or this spin-off. I don't think it was called the challenge yet. Anyways, we have Ramona from Survivor hosting the first and the last challenge of the season, and it's clear that this season is the first one that was filmed after Survivor aired. Anyways, the challenge is holding onto as many balls as possible while being bungee jumped into the water, which has some fire atop of it. The real world wins the first challenge. James claimed that the real worlders cheated, and he is clearly trying to bait them into a fight, but they aren't taking the bait. And this is really just the first sign of him being obnoxious as hell throughout the season. Rebecca talks about, yes, I initially had her as Rebecca, but it's really Julie. Anyways, Julie talks about hoping that her job will take her back, and it's been an issue since her OG show. The next challenge and the next episode is a rope course where they have to walk across trees where the other teams launch water balloons at them. Road Rules wins the challenge, and we move on to the next challenge, which is a skiing challenge, and the Real Worlders win this one. They finally get their bus trailers, and I'm shocked that it took them so long to get it. And Julie is told about AYU giving her much grief, though her parents want her to go back. Everyone keeps on talking to James about how attractive he is, and he's trying to act down to earth, cool, and coy about how, oh, I never saw myself as attractive. But it's all a bunch of bullshit, which is very apparent as the season goes on, which is leading to a showmance of some sorts with Emily. The next challenge is a fisherman. Actually, no, I don't even think it's Emily. I think he got into the showmance with Rebecca. And that's the thing. A lot of these blonde women are just so interchangeable that I don't really know who is whom, or at least for the first few episodes. And it doesn't help that I didn't watch these Real World or Road Rule seasons. Anyways, the next challenge is a fisherman challenge, which Real World wins the first part of, which is a lobster eating challenge. Then they have to run across a ledge on the sea, and the World Rules win this part, where Latyrian has to be tended to by the paramedic due to getting injured. They then have to slide across a greasy pole to grab a flag, which World Rules wins, and they win the entire challenge. We have a lot of time spent on the Rebecca and James showmance, which is just boring as hell to me. And I just don't give a single crap. Okay, now on to the next episode. Okay, so yeah, in my notes here, it's apparently Rebecca that James is romancing instead of Emily. And I mentioned earlier how I was just very confused. James is starting to get very tired of losing, which will be a huge theme throughout this season, and is getting angry over it. The next challenge is a stand up comedy challenge, and I'm bored with this entire challenge, where I'm completely tuned out. The real world wins the challenge, and James is not handling this well at all. The next challenge is some skating roller challenge, which looks fun, but also a bit messy as well. There is a discussion about Christian stating that he has some black blood in him due to having a big nose or lips, and it's ironic that he said this, and as I mentioned in some other videos, things like a big nose or big lips on white people kind of leans towards featureism where their whiteness might be questioned, but that's a whole nother topic. Anyways, Tyrion explains it to him as to why that would be seen as offensive, and Ayanna is really not here for this, which is a sign for what is to come. Road Rules wins the challenge, and I forgot to mention that LL Cool J hosted it. Clearly, the budget was raised this season. Tyrion tells Christian that he doesn't have the knowledge of blackness or black culture or what's right or what's wrong due to being Norwegian, and Tyrion realizes that he misjudged Christian, who is also teaching him about Norway and the Norwegian lifestyle, and he's teaching Christian about slang. And all this is a clear setup for the next episode. So we learn that there was a physical confrontation with Ayana hitting Christian, but we go back 24 hours. Ayana is crying due to her mother passing away through breast cancer, and it's really sad watching this, as Ayana is currently going through cancer herself as I am recording this. But we have Christian comforting her. Chan from Road Rules shows up, and he has a nice reunion with Ayana, as I think they were from the same season. I'm not too sure about that. The others arrive in the van again, and Lithuanian calls him a white boy. Christian calls him the N-word. Lithuanian gets him to apologize, and then Ayana apparently pushes Christian, who is apparently in her face. People then say that she would all Jerry Springer on him, and honestly some of this seems excessive and borderline microaggressive. And Ayana is not remorseful the next morning. Christian is trying to rationalize it to the others, and Michelle, I believe, tells him that she saw him push her, and it was just a brush. Jamie wouldn't have had to hold her back. Even Camila doesn't like the way Ayana handled it, since she agrees as black woman that it was wrong, but violence was not necessary at all. Christian mentions that he's confused that black people use it themselves, and he mentions that she doesn't. Sorry, Camila mentions that she doesn't use it. Honestly, I don't use it at all, and I feel like black people trying to reclaim the word to be something positive when everyone, even other black people, use it as a negative more often than not against other people, and then perpetuating it to people through the hip hop music and just saying it for non black people is dumb as hell. The other castmates tell him that it would be one thing if she was remorseful, but she isn't saying that, so she needs to go. The producer tells Ayana that she has to go, and she says an awkward goodbye, and when Christian tries to explain things to her, she gets pissed off and thinks that he's rubbing it in her face. Ayana was definitely very interesting during her short time on the season, learning how she sees things, and you definitely get a lot of backstory into her mentality, her viewpoint, and even her life. And honestly, she's just very captivating and she's unapologetically herself, though this would kind of become a problem throughout her challenge experience, even up into the All Stars seasons, especially All Stars 4. But for what she is, I enjoyed her, but it's clear that she needed to be home to focus on whatever she had going on. So Julie is the one who doesn't want Ayana to go at all, and she is mad about the entire situation. She starts to snap at Jamie and the rest of the cast regarding it, and the entire episode is a mourning episode for Julie in regards to Ayana's departure. The next challenge is a wrestling challenge, which Road Rules wins. Their new cast member calls the Road Rulers and gives them clues about where she is and where they have to find her, though it doesn't take long for them to find her, and we realize that Susie is the replacement for Ayana. So we learn that the relationship between James and Rebecca is not going very smoothly, but we move on to the next challenge, which is a soccer challenge and has some soccer players. I have no idea who they are. Instead, though, it is human foosball, which just turns out to be a mess, which the real worlders win. Jamie tells Rebecca that James is pretty much a bum. It's a very boring episode. I couldn't find the next episode, but the next challenge from I can find on the wiki and the prior to segment of the episode after this is that it was a cheerleading challenge. Anyways, this episode is really boring thus far, and honestly, the last few episodes haven't been the strongest, and I feel like that will be the case for a lot of the episodes after this. But Stan is getting a bit snappy while planning the routine. Sorry, I couldn't find the episode before the cheerleading challenge, as this is the cheerleading challenge, and this one was where Dan was starting to get very snippy. Road Rules wins the challenge, and the reward is annoyed with how everything took place, especially regarding Dan. So apparently, Emily and Christian got into an accident on the Road Rules season, and he got a bunch of injuries from it, and the surgery in that regard is explained to us. The next challenge is a sky walking tightrope challenge. James is acting like an ass and is picking a fight with the instructor. The Road Rules win the challenge, and they spend way too much time on it, in my opinion, to the point where I was starting to tune out. Susie is talking about how she's the only road ruler who cares about the money, which will foreshadow how she plays the game in future seasons, and they are just here for the experience. Anyways, they go to London, which is another sign of the increased budget since the prior seasons mainly just traveled in the US, for the next challenge, which is called Tough Guy, consisting of a bunch of military like training boot camp, though it isn't military themed. Ironically, she performs horribly in the challenge, and honestly, she doesn't do well in most of the challenges this season. Anyways, the real world wins the challenge, and a lot of emphasis is put onto Dan's performance. We're given some insights about Emily and Julie not getting along, but they both go to Germany next. For the challenge, they are riding their bicycle in the air so they can wind themselves up on a rope to ring the bell at the tip of the ceiling. The second part of the challenge is that they have to walk down the building, and they really hype up the Julie versus Emily rivalry. The road rulers argue about Emily not performing well in the mission, and she wants to go against Julie again. Emily storms out of the challenge again, so no one gets the point. The next challenge is them being launched into the air and dropping someone onto the target, or dropping something to the target. I guess like a balloon of some sorts, or like a water balloon, maybe. Real World wins the Defying Gravity challenge overall. I couldn't find anything on the next episode, but from what I could look up, it involved some couples fashion show, which the Real World ended up winning. The episode and challenge after that is engaging in a bunch of medieval torture challenges, and they are now in the Czech Republic. One is eating some gross food, laying in some water-filled coffin with eels being dumped in, and I'm sure there's more than I am missing. Or there's more that I am missing. James's drama is very prominent at the end of the episode, and I'm over it, as well as being over him. The next challenge is shooting a target, and some of the people are walking human shields as well. Cyrus and James really get into it because James shot Cyrus too hard, and it's really good at where Cyrus yeets his ass up, and it's ready to throw down. And it's very heated, it almost gets physical, and it's easily the standout moment of the season, outside of the Ayana stuff. Very little has been happening in the first half of the next episode, and it's very hard for me to just not tune out. And it looks like they're creating some sort of trial for the Cyrus and Jamie altercation. Sorry, James altercation, but things definitely pick up in the second half of the episode when the trial's actually happening. But it's unfortunate that Latyrian is the only one from the road rulers who actually shows up, so it isn't as satisfying as it could have been. And road rulers not showing up is just ridiculous. So we're on to the final episode, and we get more focus on James and Rebecca again, which sucks, since it's just boring as hell, and I was enjoying that dealing with them for the last few episodes. The next challenge is a racing challenge, and the real world wins it. Not only do they win the challenge, but they win the entire season, which is the first time the real world wins over road rules, and I think that is the case for the entire Era 1 in general. Anyways, the final challenge was to push a gasless car to the finish line, and I guess the cars are neutral. And then at the end, of course, everyone reflects on their experience. Okay, so I actually watched the season a few weeks ago because I watched Era 1 backwards for the first time because I really wanted to avoid this era, and this was the first one that I saw. Then I watched 1, 2, 3 for the first time recording this, so this is my second time watching season 4, now having the context of the earlier seasons. And like I mentioned earlier, I definitely do not think that this format warranted 17 episodes. While there are a lot of good, fun moments, and while a lot of the cast members are solid, the show just cannot sustain with this format anymore. One, there hasn't been anywhere to knees in the second, third, or fourth season, so it kind of seems one-offish in that element. And we all know that every season after this would feature returning alumni of the challenge, so there's more consistency, and they really change up the format where people go home every episode. So just looking at the cast here, Camila, Rebecca, Christian, and Michelle, who unfortunately Michelle passed away a year after this, so rest in peace to her, didn't return after this, and they're definitely some of the more forgettable ones in my opinion. Jeremy really didn't stand out much to me, though he's apparently one of the more notable people of the era. Dan definitely had his moments, though I'm assuming he'll be better on his other two seasons. Julie has this interesting arc throughout the season, and it's interesting watching her later seasons and seeing how different she is, but she's definitely one of the more interesting ones. Cyrus was just a ball of personality, and I really enjoyed watching him as well. Emily, someone who I don't really have much to say about. Even Susie isn't as memorable here as she would be in her other seasons, where I definitely was into her. James was easily like the biggest star of the season. And it's crazy that he only did one season after this. Maybe the challenge wasn't for him, though he was tired of losing and he really wanted to compete, and you would have thought that he would have thrived there, and his douchiness would have given him more seasons. Ayana, I definitely see why she came back for the next two seasons, and of course her All Stars run as well. The T-Rain, he was cool and likable here, but he really wasn't as big personality-wise as he was in his later seasons, especially in his All-Stars run, where he really comes to form there. Overall, a lot of solid casting choices here and a lot of meh choices as well. Anyways, we have our very first reunion of the challenge, where Mark from season 2, and who will continue to host, but he will host next season, and Alyssa from the real world are hosting, and we learn that Julie and Emily are now cool. They talk about Ayana's departure, and Latyrion talks about how he missed her, and Ayana was getting watery as he was talking about this, which I found to be sweet. Apparently, the experience made Julie grow closer to her family, and it humbled her. They talk about Ayana's departure, and she states that she's still not sorry since she was reacting to what he did, and Christian is very sorry for it. Ayana talks about how many family members passed in the last year, so it wasn't just her mother, and it was just a build up upon build up upon build up, though she explains that she wished that the situation never happened. James and Emily shockingly never went anywhere, though they're still good friends. The paintball situation is discussed again, and Julie mentions that she doesn't like how James is being painted as aggressive in the situation, and Cyrus calls this out. Apparently, Dan was pissed off after the cheerleading challenge because he saw them talking about him making hand movements, and he took it as homophobic. We learn that Christian is donating a bunch of money to one of Ayana's campuses for one of her causes, which is a nice way to, I guess, end their arc. And I'm shocked that Christian never came back, though he performed really well in the challenges here, and he had a decent enough arc here that you would have thought that the producers wanted to capitalize on. But from what I've heard, he did a lot of international road rule seasons, so maybe that was more his lane. So that is my experience with the first 4 seasons, which is essentially equivalent to Big Brother 1 to the rest of Big Brother. And if anyone gets that analogy, Big Brother 1 was essentially a completely different show from anything else after it. And that is how I feel with the first 4 seasons of the challenge. Unlike Big Brother 1, I actually was able to watch these seasons, so props to it. But the first 4 seasons isn't something that I would rewatch ever again, really, unless I wanted to be a completionist with a rewatch. But it is interesting to see where the show started, and even to see where some of these OG legendary challengers started their journey on, to compare how they are now or in the later seasons to how it is here, and just to see how the game evolved from the 90s and early 2000s up until now. No competition reality show lasted 25 years, and it really says a lot that this show was able to do that. So I'm definitely looking forward to watching more seasons and really soaking in the historical context. So, since season 5 is close enough to a normal season where there are eliminations, or vote outs, challenges, competitiveness, strategy, and all of that jazz. I'm thinking that I'm going to do each of those seasons one at a time. So season 5 will be one video, season 6 will be another video, so on and so forth. And I'm probably going to do an era recap, kind of like I did with the Big Brother rewatch. So I did it with the players, but I'm mainly just going to talk about the eras in itself, not really the players. I have no idea how I'm going to rank all the challenge players, especially since there are so many different formats. Some of these people only played during team seasons, others only played during individual seasons, some only played in seasons where no one went home. So it's all confusing, but I'm looking forward to this journey and thank you all for following me with it. Anyways, my Twitter is in the description box below. You can follow me on my other channel where I post Big Brother compilation videos, where my past and future ones will go there. And you can subscribe and like this video and follow this channel if you haven't already. Thank you all for watching, and I'm very excited to get into this now. Take care.